All right.
Everyone, I welcome you to our penultimate summer Sunday book reviews. Today we have Mr. Lucky Sahualla. Lucky will be introducing his book shortly. But next week, we'll be having our last Sunday book review. It will be led by Mr. Andy Achenbaum, entitled Safeguarding Social Security for All Generations. That's a book he wrote. We'd be glad if you could join us for our last Sunday book review. And then just a reminder, we will not have any Sunday forum on August 27th. We will be hoping to see you all at our West Campus at 10:30 for our closing worship at that time. So God bless you all, and Lucky, please.
Good morning. Next week sounds cool, but I'll miss it because I'll be away taking kids to college. So this is the book I'm reviewing. It's called Grace, President Obama in 10 Days in the Battle for America by Cody Keenan. I was introduced to this book kind of by accident. We are going up to American University last October for Parents Weekend because our oldest daughter Grace goes there. And they had sent out this thing saying there's some events you might want to go to as a parent. And wow, we went to like 3 or 4 just amazing events. This was the first one. This guy was Cody Keenan was a Obama from the kind of the early-ish days of the campaign in 2008 or the 2008 election, all the way through the end of his time at the White House, and then for another 3 to 4 years after the White House. And so it was an interesting little thing. I was probably sitting from me to Renetta away from him during his book talk in a room kind of like this, but just wider at the campus. And he was being interviewed by a guy that I often see on TV on NBC. Was the moderator, and it was kind of neat. You got to know Cody a little bit and a little bit about the book. So why I thought this book was interesting, you could buy these at the event, of course, because it had just come out, and it was a first stop on his book tour to promote it. And it was just very interesting. And then afterwards, you could get the book signed, by going to the table. And I kind of rushed out because I was starting to get hungry and was like the first or second person in line, so he still had time to talk to people. So we had a short little conversation, and just a nice guy. He'd asked me, what do my kids think of there being a black president, what they think of Obama being president. And I was like, they think it's normal that, there's the first president they remember. They were born in 2003 and 2005, and so to them, it's not a big deal. And he said, yeah, that's interesting. And I said, it's kind of like people in your generation and people being out and gay, that like you just always knew about it, so it didn't mean anything to you. You didn't, but it was the other generations had to catch up, right, and realize that that's a better way of looking at the world than the way we were taught to look at it, maybe, right? And funny enough, that he says the exact same thing in the book eventually. That once gay people started just coming out to their family had to make a choice. Do I still love my loved one, or do I hate gay people? And that softened it so quickly that the change happened very rapidly. And so I had said that exact same thing to him, then I read it in the book, and I was like, he's gonna think I read this before I talked to him, and I was like, buttering him up or something. But so the book is very interesting in that it covers theoretically 10 days in time. Those 10 days run from the day that the Dylan Roof went into the church in Charleston, South Carolina, joined a Bible study, and then shot 9 people at the end of it and killed them, to the day that Obama ended up giving a eulogy at the funeral for the pastor from that church, Clementa Pinckney. So, and within that time, it also happens to be Supreme Court week, where the final sets of opinions are coming out at the end of June before they want to go on their July 4th recess. Which means the ACA decision came out the second time that the Supreme Court affirmed the ACA instead of overruling it. And the gay marriage case came out Obergefell that week as well. So a lot was going on. Now, that's to say, ostensibly, it's the 10 days because he brings in things from the past to make sense of what's happening that week. So I thought it was an excellent device that he used because it's basically a memoir, but it's not a memoir about him. It's a memoir about this time and about what's going on in the world, and it's really kind of cool. And it's a great device to be able to write about kind of ACA, the Affordable Health Care Act or Obamacare as one of the best policy accomplishments of Obama's time in his eyes, and also one of the biggest failures in that nothing was able to be done about guns at any level to kind of slow down the mass violence that was been erupting for a while. So in the end, when I heard him talking, I thought, wow, man, speechwriter, that's kind of one of those cool jobs. I should have thought about doing something like that when I was younger, right? I would have enjoyed that. Turns out it's not a very fun job. It's full of stress and a lot of challenges, which we'll get into some in a little bit. There's too many people to please. In the end, he decided he had to write for an audience of one. If he could please Obama, that meant that he was pleasing Obama's audience, and that's all he had to worry about was pleasing Obama. But now he's trying to please the most important, powerful person in the world, theoretically, right? Which apparently, even though Obama's comes off in the book as very collaborative and very understanding and a great person to work with, I don't think he was a very easy person to impress. In the sense of like, your best work had to really be your best work. He always needed your best work because he felt so committed to the important thing he was trying to do. So there's lots of little asides in the book. I'll call them borderline rants about policy, especially about Republicans and their recalcitrance on it, the issues that he cares about. I'm going to leave that part out. They're interesting to read from time to time, but it's the same stuff you've heard before, just from someone on the inside. And he does not dish a whole bunch of personal stuff about Republicans, so don't worry, or Democrats, either one. The other thing you walk away from the book with is a sense of just how hard it is to be president if you intend to do it right. Just the level of considerations that have to go into it, the kind of difficulty and impact of the decisions you have to make can be paralyzing. So it's not for one who's paralyzed easily by stress or thoughts or competing demands. So the author, Cody, said he doesn't tell you a lot about his life, but you get a little bit of glimpses about what's going on in his life professionally and the things that are happening kind of around the time of working in the White House. He grew up in Chicago and then ended up in the suburbs a little bit, going to school, went to Northwestern. He loves a background role and shuns the spotlight. This book cover is perfect. He'd rather you see the back of his head if anything at all. You know, it's all about the boss, not about him. He's a very humble guy. He started out, didn't know what he wanted to do after college, had a friend in DC, ended up getting a job with Ted Kennedy's office as an intern. He was just calling around for internships. And he thought, this is awesome. I got this great internship. He shows up and he's one of 50 interns they've hired for the summer. And so he's basically walking Ted's dog, organizing papers and stuff like that. He ends up eventually getting a chance to write, do some response to constituent correspondence, and he's a good writer. And so someone puts him on more of that, and eventually he gets a chance to write a floor speech for Kennedy to give in the Senate, basically to C-SPAN, because there's going to be no one else in there. And he's so proud of himself, and he calls his parents and they watch C-SPAN to see his speech. So that's about as close to like a personal story as you get on him. So what Ted Kennedy used to do, though, is he would pay his interns, people that worked in his office, his staff, if you want to go work at the convention, the Democratic convention, I'll keep paying you and you can go work there for a volunteer for a day or two. So Cody signed up for that. He volunteers on the floor. He gets stuck with a Tuesday because he's kind of low ranking in the office. But that Tuesday in 2004 happens to be the day that Obama speaks at the Democratic National Convention and kind of catapults himself to national prominence. And so Cody, standing in the corner way in the back without a real seat, just falls in love with what the man is saying and decides he needs to be a part of that someday. Gets back to Ted Kennedy's office, gets talking to him. Kennedy talks him into going to policy school, and he ends up going to public policy school at Harvard. I'm not sure exactly how he got into the Kennedy School of Government with a letter of recommendation from Ted Kennedy, but apparently that works out.
Something about legacy admission.
Yeah, probably. Or at least if you want to go there, it's too late for Ted, but get a Kennedy on the letter. So he got hired onto the presidential campaign. You guys might know that, like, there's a famous speechwriter who worked for Obama, who's made a career out of being a famous speechwriter for Obama, John Favreau, and he's done all this stuff since, and has made himself probably fabulously wealthy, at least fabulously famous. Cody was his replacement, and this eventually became like his go-to guy. Just totally opposite personality. Cody has no interest in being famous. When he would run to get onto Marine One every once in a while, he would ride on Marine One. I'll say more about it, but like he would try to hide behind other people so that the press wouldn't see him because he's like, I don't want my picture anywhere. I don't want, that. So, he ended up dating one of the people in the research office and ended up marrying her eventually. Her name is Kristen. It's funny because she was one of his fact checkers, and he would like to joke that my wife gets paid to tell me I'm wrong. And then he also loved to make this joke with her, though she never laughed at it, that his wheelhouse, remember, there's a publication that does the fact checking stuff, and they rate it from, true to pants on fire, or he says, my wheelhouse is mostly true. And of course that drives her nuts because mostly true isn't good enough, right? And he's great with the turn of phrase. And so I wanted to read a few little pieces where he writes. This can get you how he's a speechwriter, right? Because he can put a cool thought in a sentence. So this is at the congressional picnic. The book opens with a story about the congressional picnic. And Obama, this is his comment about how Obama eats in this congressional picnic, which he looks at as just like this kind of farce of an event where Congress comes to the White House, has a picnic, get their kids' pictures taken with Obama and grandkids, and then they go back to their office and start spewing crap about Obama again, right? And he says, in the quotes today, I'm going to quote exactly what Cody and President Obama say, which means it's going to use a couple of words we might not normally use in Sunday forum.
Okay.
So Obama zealously committed to wholesome eating, and someone who almost exclusively judged a meal on his nutritional statistics alone was doomed to consume only BS for the next hour. This guy, and then while Obama did dictate or approve the content of his tweets, he didn't have the ability to tweet from his own phone. Only morons would allow our president to do that. 126. This is about when the Supreme Court is having its Supreme Court week and it releases opinions. It still does it in a very old-fashioned way where it just hands out printed documents and then reads it out. So you're getting people trying to read it quickly and people trying to deliver it to news reporters just outside who are getting it in their earpiece from someone inside the court. So there's all these interns that are just running from the court out to the news people standing out waiting to report on it and go on air. And so he says a group of young journalism interns carrying copies would explode from the court and race across the plaza to be the first to deliver it to their network's on-air reporter. You could tell which interns had limited themselves to debate society in high school and which had also run track. And 134. We'll skip that one for now, because I'm gonna read that later, I think. No. There we go. Too often in politics, telling the truth that most people already know passes for radical. It's just not so much a turn of phrase, but an interesting observation. And then I enjoy, so he takes smoke breaks. Cody was a smoker, at least back then. I don't know if he still is today. He says, I enjoyed these smoking runs most on frigid nights during the State of the Union process, when I purposely go out in shirt sleeves to scare off sleepiness, shivering and taking a long, slow pull of poison cut with cold air. So willing to turn it on himself. Okay, so I said the job's not fun. So it's a 12-hour workday plus. That's the workday. And then if you're the boss, that means that whole day is spent managing and directing and responding to stuff. And so when he writes, he has to write outside of that 12-hour workday. The workday starts at 6:30 a.m. where he gets what they call their daily media monitor, which is someone in the research office that's gone through all the overnight news and put together this report of national and international news of what's going on in the world. Used to be literally cut out of newspapers and taped on a piece of paper and then photocopied. Now it's just cut and sent in an email, of course. 7:45, he'd be in the senior advisors meeting, led by the chief of staff. And this is not so much cabinet, but more advisors like Valerie Jarrett would be in there. Homeland Security people would be in there and stuff like that, but not the security briefing. This is just the policy type. What are we doing today meeting? By 9 o'clock, he'd be in the meeting with his writing staff, and then he'd spend all day in meetings responding to emails. Research, fact checking, and speech writing vetted every single public comment, written or spoken, from the president. Every tweet, he would literally have to approve a tweet, and it would have to go to multiple people before a tweet would go out. Just anything that's put into public. And then he would do that all day, responding to emails, checking in with the staff on what they're working on, et cetera. And then at 6:30 is the end of day senior advisors meeting. And then he gets 2 weeks a year vacation. So it's 12, 14-hour days and a couple weeks of the year of vacation. And of course, when there's a big speech to do, like State of the Union, or in this case, short notice eulogy, you're working all night a couple nights. Now, he just does get to work in the White House, but he basically works in the White House dungeon. It's just placed down under the Oval Office somewhere where there's no windows and no light, but at least they get vitamin D pills. He does get access to the president though in this job. Sometimes on his own request, say, I need time with the president today. That's all he has to tell the president's secretary and they'll find a spot in the schedule for him somewhere. He gets to collaborate with the president. And he gets to use this 18th century writing desk in this office that he now dubbed the speech cave. And given to him with one statement, please don't make me regret doing this. So, he says you always dream of writing a State of the Union address until you actually have to write one. Then you realize you signed up for one of the hardest jobs in the world. You're using someone else's voice. You have to thread this thin line. You have to go for the applause moments and the meaningful moments, and it's a policy speech, But if you make too many other people offended by what you've done, then they won't support, you won't get that rest of the country that doesn't already agree with you to support your policies. You have to make an argument to keep everyone involved and the benefits of the policies for everyone. He said he always told his staff to write as if they were writing, or as if they were describing the policy to a friend at a bar. Just sitting down, having a drink at a bar, describing it to a friend. And he covers this is another little cute passage. He does the 5 stages of speech writing neuroses. Denial. It's only 4 pages and there's a formula to it. Just write something down, revise it a bit, and give it to the boss. If he changes it, no big deal. Been there, done that. This is easy. You'll be done in 2 hours. Anger. How did you let 3 full days go with nothing to show for it? Why did you waste so much time preparing 19 pages of notes? 19 pages for a 4-page speech. What is wrong with you? Bargaining. Maybe someone else wants to do this? Litz said he wanted to do it. I wonder if he's still awake. Depression. I am so screwed. I can't do this. He's going to be so pissed. Everyone's finally going to figure out that I'm basically a fraud. Acceptance. Okay, it's probably time to get to work. He talks about going through that, and you get his experience of that exact thing writing this eulogy. Just you get the full experience of it. So he always said, and he believes that empathy is the most important quality in a speechwriter, to be able to put yourself in other people's shoes, the listener's shoes, and understand how it's going to resonate. It's an involved and all-consuming job, like I said before. But in the end, he said it's also so all-consuming that it becomes your way of thinking, that every time you hear a news event, all you can think about is, okay, what's Obama going to have to say about this? What do I need to say? What do I need to tell staff to write about this topic? Because he's going to have to say something publicly, at least in a press conference. What's it going to be? And so he started to realize he was kind of basically disengaged from the world because he was looking at it through this removal lens of writing about it. Now the communications team is huge. The research team, the fact checkers, their basic job is to protect the president from himself. He calls them pre-crisis consultants. Their job is to make sure that he doesn't say anything that contradicts himself or that makes a policy position he wants to take later harder to take, and all this. And a good example of this is a funny story that you guys might have seen at the time it happened. In 2012, they were deciding where's Obama going to be on gay marriage. He knew where he wanted to be. He wanted to be in favor of it. He wanted to see if he could get the Supreme Court to validate it nationally. But he wasn't sure how it would play in the campaign yet. And so he's debating, do I say I'm in favor of it before, during the campaign, or after the campaign, once we're in office and I push for it as an agenda item? Well, one day Biden gets asked a question by a reporter, and Biden spurts out, well, I just don't see the difference. It's two people who love each other. Who cares if they're men or women? It doesn't really matter. And now Obama has to answer either, okay, does he agree or disagree with Biden? You know what? So he's like, screw it. 2 days later, we're coming out. We're in favor of it. And like, it was an interesting story about how, like, it kind of, when pressure was on, he made the right decision. He's like, yep, okay, just, it's where I stand. We got to say it. So it ended up working out. Obviously, he got elected. And then there's a whole other team on the press side that does things like get everything ready for reporters to use. So if Cody's writing a speech, they're getting copies of it so I can go find all the background statistics to support every argument Obama's making. So when the journalists get it, they get it with the fact sheet of all the little quotes and stuff they could use in their article to support it. And then the team is divided up into some kind of concentrations. Like there's one guy who writes all the national security speeches. There's someone who writes the foreign policy speeches. And then the other areas that kind of develop policy specialties so that they can kind of have a kind of a go-to person for a lot of things. And then there's 2 writers for the First Lady that are also part of the team, which is kind of a funny story. Her first speechwriter she wrote with her from the campaign was this young Jewish woman, Sarah Hurwitz, who somehow captured Michelle's voice really well. And then they hired a second guy named Tyler, who's from like a really rural area, totally the opposite of where Michelle Obama's from, a white, rural person, and he writes her voice better than anybody. It was really funny because Cody said the first time that Obama met Tyler, he's like, you never told me Tyler's white? I thought Tyler was black. It's like, he's just assumed that no one could write Michelle's voice that well unless they were somewhat similar to her in life experience. And he said his favorite times was when he could get Obama's time ahead of a speech because he could throw in prompts and then just type like crazy while Obama did like a free association type thing and get down a lot of good material ahead of time without having to do it all himself. And then there's some interesting things Obama had to say about speeches. Of course, Obama being a writer himself kind of worked with the attitude, and probably accurate attitude, that he was his own best speechwriter. And these guys were working for me as my collaborators, but as my team. And you know, their job is to aspire to write a speech that I would write, which made it hard for Cody, of course, and all his coworkers to do the job because the expectations are so high. But there's some, aside from just being a good speechwriter, Obama likes to leave with them specific things that he thinks about and approaches so that they can come closer, right? And so these are some of his rules, I guess you'd say, or his kind of advice on speeches is, first of all, never let a captive audience go to waste. So if we've got something to say, let's say it, right? No rhetorical questions in any remarks or speeches. I'm not going to ask a question and answer it. I'm just going to answer it. Just tell me what I need to say. If a writer is not confident in what they give him, if they give him a speech and he says, how is it? And they're like, yeah, it's not bad. He's like, okay, well, go work on it some more and bring it back because I don't have time to spend. I got too little time to spend. I can't spend it on something that's not close, that you don't think is close to a final draft. So Cody said he learned to lie and just say, oh yeah, it's pretty good. Because sometimes you don't have anything else to put on the page. You've done it all. It's still not that great. But you say, oh, it's good. But Obama loved to say, all right, good. We got a day and a half. Let's make it better. We got 4 hours. Let's make it better. We got the plane ride there. Let's make it better. So it was always, let's make it better. He also had the rule of never assign motives to other people in your speeches. That you just tell facts, don't try to guess why they're doing it, just say what they did.
That's sort of a democratic process idea.
Exactly.
I mean, that's what democracy is. You can't assign motives to people, but they get a voice.
Right. Well, the frustrating thing for Cody was that sometimes you know their motives because they've said them, but you still don't do it, right? Yeah, you still only talk about what they said, not why they said it or who they hate or what they're against, right? At least not for Obama. Other people can do that. And that's what was so frustrating to them is that, you know, Obama's approach was to always take the temperature down of the public discourse on something. Bring it down so we can talk about what can get done, where we can go on this, what can happen on it. Of course, his opponents were doing the opposite at all times, pretty much. Obama told him that read James Baldwin when you're stuck and listen to John Coltrane when you're not. And he also told him to find the silences in the speeches, that we can't all be up here. Some of it has to be down here so that the up here is heard. And so he told him to listen to Miles Davis to learn how to use silences in your cadence. And of course, Obama always wants a happy, hopeful ending that brings everyone into the picture and tries to tie everyone through the purpose of what's trying to be accomplished, which is what Cody found sometimes the hardest, is how do you take one of these things that happened where it's been such a bitter, angry process and turn it into something where you're going to invite everyone in to help you fix it. But Obama felt that was the only way anything was going to get fixed. So there's 10 chapters. I'll give you an overview of them. There's actually 12 chapters for 10 days, but he cheated. He included a day that wasn't in the 10 days, and then he does a prologue. I'll admit that I got home from the speech, from the presentation, I don't know what you call it, the book talk, I guess. And I started reading it that night. And I almost didn't put it down, but like we had a busy day the next day with 2 more really cool sessions to go to with famous, one had 3 former chiefs of staff from from different parties talking about the process of transitioning a president from like one administration to another, which is a really cool story in of itself about how 2 of these guys were former Republican chiefs of staff. And there was one guy in the Trump administration who was willing to work on the transition because he was the only one willing to incur the ire of Trump. but he tried to do it in secret. And these two guys were basically on the phone with him, telling him how to do it, because he couldn't get help from anyone else constantly. They were like on speed dial with this guy, helping him get it done, and talked him off the ledge a number of times. So the first chapter he talks about is back in March of 2015, March 5th of 2015, 2 days before March 7th, which is the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday on the bridge in Selma. And so Obama's going to talk at that event for the 50th anniversary at the bridge. And so that led to the Voting Rights Act. And I think Cody talked about it only because it ends up tying into the content and speech on race, the piece of the eulogy that's about race relations at the end of the book. And so this idea of like the first day is Wednesday, June 17th, 2015. That's the Congressional Picnic Day. Loretta Lynch was also sworn in as AG that day. And then that week's speech list was the US Conference of Mayors, a couple of fundraisers he had to go to, a couple of economic speeches he had to give, the White House reception for Pride Month, and Obama was to give remarks at a White House iftar dinner at the end of Ramadan. The next week's speech list is SCOTUS week, so you've got to be ready to respond to whatever the Supreme Court does. And when they would write for Supreme Court opinions, the important ones, they would write for every scenario. So for ACA, they wrote for we win, we get to keep everything like it is. We lose everything, or we get a partial victory in this way, we get a partial victory in that way. And they're working with lawyers to figure out, well, what will it mean if the Supreme Court rules this and that? And then, so they're working on multiple versions of lots of these speeches. And then that was kind of supposed to be the week though. It was supposed to be SCOTUS week. And it's going to be challenging, lots of things to write, but you have lots of help, should be a good week. And then the night of the Congressional Picnic is when that murders happened in Charleston. And so now Cody's thinking, well, first of all, this is a horrible thing, but he's also thinking Obama's not going to do anything about it, not going to speak on it, because after Newtown, Obama decided, I'm not ever doing this again. I'm never going to go out there and say that we can fix this problem when we can't. When we can't even pass universal background checks, I'm just not going to do it. We can't get any legislation passed on guns, period. So there's no way I can fix it. I can't promise people I'm going to fix it when I can't. And so there's a little bit more on that, and I'll come up in a minute. Because they had already done a dozen speeches on mass murder at this point in the administration. Thursday, June 18th, 2015. The first thing he gets in the morning is the president's going to need to make some remarks on this. And he's like, oh God, I guess he does have to at least make some remarks. So he has to start working on something for the president to say that day about what happened. He's trying to figure out what they can use. What can we use? What can I say? Can we call this terrorism? To the common observer, it is, but we can't, because the national security lawyers say it's technically there's not quite terrorism, and there's all these arguments, and he has to start putting alleged in front of the alleged murderer. Well, we know who it was. We've got eyewitnesses saying it was him, and he's tense day for everybody, of course. And they started to gather research on everything. And the big takeaway that day was Clementa Pinckney, who was the pastor at that church. He was killed. He was in the pulpit preaching and talking at the age of 13, a pastor at 18, and in his early 20s, he was a state legislator already in South Carolina, trying to change the law for the better. And one of his friends that they had contacted made this comment about him. When he entered the room, it was like the future arrived. So, but still Obama's not going, right? He tells the story of Newtown, which I just told you a little bit, but Obama gave a eulogy there. So something unusual happened that day. It was in December of 2012. So Obama's been in office for 4.5 years, almost 4. And that's the only time that Obama's assistant ever went and got Michelle from the residence and brought her to the Oval Office to be with President Obama because of his state of mind. He later told Cody that was the first day he cried in the Oval Office. And Cody says that the next day was the second time, because when writing the remarks, Cody had written up a phrase in the remarks, and Obama says, I can't get through that today. I can't. And you're right, but I can't get through it up there in front of everybody. So they took it out, and he still couldn't get through the remarks. This is just the remarks. This is not a eulogy. It's just the next morning saying something about it. And that became the second most watched White House YouTube of all time after those remarks. But interestingly enough, he did the eulogy in Newtown. Obama was supposed to go see a performance of the Nutcracker on Sunday evening that his daughter was in at her school. But he ended up going to the dress rehearsal in the morning and working on the speech during the dress rehearsal so he could at least see some of it. And then taking the plane to Connecticut that evening. For 3 hours before the service of eulogy, he and Michelle met with every family individually of the 26 victims of Newtown. And he said it's the only time he ever saw Secret Service members cry. But after the failed legislation, he just wanted to be done with this. I think some of it torturing himself with the pain of these families and such, right? So he ended up not being able to hold himself to his promise not to do more eulogies on mass shootings, because 2 of them happened at military bases at the Navy Yard and at Fort Hood. And so he had to give eulogies for the service members as the commander-in-chief, he felt. But eulogies were a big theme of Cody's work. He wrote the original eulogy for the service for the folks that were shot in Phoenix, or in Tucson rather, when Gabby Giffords was shot. And in fact, that was the first speech he got some real notoriety for nationally. He kind of got it by accident. Favreau was really tied up and didn't have time to write the remarks that morning for it, and called Cody in to write the remarks. And the remarks were so well received. He goes, well, just keep going. You've done the research, do the eulogy now. So he did the eulogy, and then on Air Force One on the way back, someone in the press asked who helped Obama write that speech, because that was really awesome. They told him who it was, and now Cody's name ends up in the papers, which he didn't love, but it's part of the job, I guess. I thought it was really cool, some of the things he wrote about working in the White House. I was going to read you a few of these little funny or interesting things he had to say about that. He says, you guys probably know who Jen Psaki is. She ended up as Obama's communications director, but she was involved in the press office. I mean, for Biden, she was just head of press. She was in the press office working as an assistant at this time. And she's 9 months pregnant while all this is going on. And he says, on my way to the Oval Office 5 minutes later, draft in hand, I ran into Jen Psaki, tottering down the stairs, one arm on the railing for support. She was about 9 months pregnant. I just read the statement, she said. The ending made me a little emotional. Then again, so does a good sandwich right now. He writes about Ben Rhodes is the what do you call it? He's the national security writer guy. He really likes him a lot. Back here, there's a lady named Lisa Monaco, who is she's one of the national security team to advise the president. So she's like a national security advisor. She comes into his office one morning and says like, bro, which is what she calls him. And he's like, I like that. And I'm being called bro. It's kind of like she was my older sister, you know, like his. And but so this lady serves on the president's highest ranking. She's one of the, by 2015, she'd become one of the president's 3 highest ranking national security aides, along with Susan Rice, his national security advisor, and Avril Haines, the former deputy director of the CIA, who returned to the Obama White House to serve as deputy director of the National Security Council. He says, we call the three women the Furies, after the Greek goddesses of vengeance. And one of the people see, Terry Supplied. He said, one of the people he said looked like a Kennedy, but was like from a totally different point of view. And he says he would have made a good Kennedy, except he didn't like the public spotlight. So that's the one, yeah. So Cody ends up marrying Kristen, the Obamas on Marine One on the way to the speech in Charleston, invite themselves to his wedding. They end up not coming because they realize what a big mess it's gonna make. So instead, they let Cody bring his whole wedding to the White House, family and friends and wedding party to the White House lawn for a little reception. That they said, they told everybody Obama wasn't coming, that he was off golfing with a friend, so that they could kind of reduce everyone's anxiety. But then Obama popped in, of course, and took pictures with them all and met everybody. And so on day 3, Friday, June 19th, 2015, Obama's still not going to Charleston, but the details are starting to come in and it's starting to look as bad as we know it was in the end. It was racial violence. It was someone who self-radicalized using the internet. It was a whole new level. So this is where he tells the origin story of the My Brother's Keeper initiative. Anyone remembers that? It was what we could do to help young people basically find a path to being a better life. And what happened was, after the legislation for Newtown failed, after that, and they couldn't get any new gun restrictions, even the universal background checks in place, someone on his staff who'd been with him for the longest time, everyone was angry, of course, and everyone's sitting around in this office fuming about it, and she just walked out. She came back a few hours later with a list of 10 things Obama could do. And that's what became My Brother's Keeper, for those things. So, the next day, so on Friday, Saturday is when this is found out, but Friday is when it happened. So, on Saturday, Cody becomes aware of the statements made by the families right after Charleston. You guys remember that they basically came out, let me find it real quick, and said, here it is. This is, they were shot on Thursday night. This is Friday. But then something remarkable happened. First family member of the worshipers, already known as the Charleston Nine, approached a microphone to address their murderer. I thought about what I might say, what vitriol I might spew, what sick burn I might leave to rattle around in that scumbag's brain as he rotted in prison until he died. Then I heard her voice. I just want everybody to know, to you, I forgive you. The text on the video identified the woman as Nadine Collier, the daughter of 70-year-old Ethel Lance, a sexton who took care of the church. A sexton is like a custodian. You look something very precious away from me. I will never talk to her ever again. I will never be able to hold her again. But I forgive you and have mercy on your soul. You hurt me. You hurt a lot of people. But God forgives you, and I forgive you. She wailed the words, but she was fully in control of them. A lamentation that froze the air and made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And then, of course, the next family member We welcomed you Wednesday night in our Bible study with open arms. You have killed some of the most beautifulest people I know. Every fiber in my body hurts, and I'll never be the same. Tywanza Sanders was my son, but Tywanza was my hero. Tywanza was my hero. But as we say in the Bible study, we enjoyed you, but may God have mercy on you. I forgive you. My family forgives you. We have no room for hating, so we have to forgive. I pray God on your soul. So, completely unexpected. Cody was raised a good Episcopalian boy, confirmed, all that stuff. Not currently religious practicing, but so they end up deciding that Obama has to speak, right? There's really no choice. But I want to read to you a little bit of the conversation when that was decided. Now, I debated, and I kind of it queued up, but I don't think I'm going to show the video. You should watch the video of the speech. It's too long, and it's 30-something minutes. And if I cut out a little piece, you miss the point of the whole thing, right? See how it all comes together. But basically, the whole rest of the book from this point on is the writing of the speech. And how's it going to come out? Is it going to come out, etc. And will he even speak? So Cody gets summoned to the Oval. And he decides, well, I'm going to take some more people with me. So he brings Josh Ernest, Jen Psaki, and Valerie Jarrett with him. And here's where it starts with Obama. Oh, so look, he said, I've come around to the idea that I have to go to Reverend Pinckney's service in Charleston to pay my respects. I want to hug those families, but I don't really want to talk. Of course, Valerie objected. President, they'll expect you to speak. Obama raised his arms in an exaggerated shrug. I have nothing left to say. He let them fall dramatically until his palm slapped his thighs. Then he looked at me. Do you? I shook my head. No, sir. With his left hand, he pointed at me. See, Cody doesn't know what to say either. We have run out of words. It was, I thought, the first time he'd ever used me as a human shield. I preferred it to being the punching bag. I have done this too many times, and it doesn't have any impact. And I don't want to perpetuate this notion that somehow it's okay that this is normal. If he was adamantly against speaking, though, he would have put his foot down by now. I knew him too well. I was starting to sense that this was one of Obama's setups where he already knew what was going to happen, but feigned befuddlement to force his staff into making the argument for it. Josh Ernest was, well, too earnest for games. He looked for the best in every situation. Mr. President, I think what the families of the victims did on Friday was pretty extraordinary. That's something you could talk about if you speak. Obama had seen the video of the Charleston families while in California. That's where those fundraiser events and such were. His shoulders relaxed a bit, and he walked around to the front of the desk, sat against it, and crossed his arms. Their actions shouldn't be a surprise, he said. I've got some experience in the AME Church, African Methodist Episcopal. And I don't know if you guys know it, but the ELCA is currently in talks for joint communion, full joint communion with the AME Church. So hopefully those will end up being successful. Grace and forgiveness are tenets of the AME Church, but I found it very moving. People could learn something from that. Arms still crossed, he lifted his left forearm to emphasize a point. But I don't think people need me to tell them that. You'll have to say something, Valerie protested again. My cheeks were burning. I'd be the one up all night trying to figure out what to say. But only one person got to vent in the Oval Office, and that was Obama. We don't need to have another conversation about race, he said, opening the steam vent a little. I'm tired of hearing that. We've been having that conversation for 400 years. We talk about race all the time. I gave a whole speech on it in Philadelphia, remember? He was referring to the race speech he delivered in March of 2008 during the campaign, honestly laying out America's long racial stalemate in a successful attempt to cool passions in the heat of the campaign. We don't need another speech. One thing we can do is take down the flag. By the flag, he means the Confederate flag that flew on the Capitol grounds in South Carolina, the Capitol. Interestingly enough, Mitt Romney, right after the events of the shootings, tweeted out that the flag should come down, and Obama retweeted it without adding much, except for Mitt is right, I think is all he added, or well said, Mitt, or something like that. Obama had said before that the Confederate flag belonged in a museum, not in public. And just 2 days earlier, he seconded Mitt Romney's similar stance. To say it again this week struck me both as a big deal and a half measure at once. It would be a big symbolic gesture for the South Carolina legislature to remove the battle flag from its grounds, removing some of its legitimacy and the pain it caused Americans who saw it every day. But it wouldn't solve the larger problem. What's more, removing the flag from the grounds of the state capitol would require a 2/3 majority of both chambers of the South Carolina legislature. And they were nowhere near that number yet. Some members were dug in, either defending the flag or protesting that they'd already removed it from the Capitol dome in 2000 and placed it out front instead. Newly surfaced photos over the weekend of Dylann Roof waving the Confederate flag softened those positions, or at least made them quieter. Obama taking a stand might harden them again, diminishing the chance for a change. I think people know where I stand on that, Obama said. But let's take on the notion of the flag as tradition. What history exactly are we celebrating here? He teed himself up to answer his own question. This is one of Cody's complaints is I never get to use rhetorical statements, but every time he talks to us, he gives them all the time. The Confederacy formed with the explicit purpose of preserving slavery and all it entailed. They felt so strongly about maintaining the chattel slavery that they were willing to break up the Union and go to war. Hundreds of thousands of Americans died, and in the wake of that, during the process of Reconstruction, an entire apparatus of the Klan, black codes, sharecropping, Jim Crow, and redlining were explicitly designed to continue de facto segregation as it existed previously to terrorize citizens. Is that the tradition we're celebrating? What am I missing? Again, they were rhetorical questions. But in my first year or two of working for him, I would have been nervous enough to try and fill the silence with an answer. Don't look at me, I instead thought to myself, I don't want to write a eulogy either. I was enjoying the soliloquy though. One of Obama's talents I always appreciated was his ability to summarize history pithily. And as always, spinning him up was a great way to extract some ideas from his brain. The release valve was fully open now. Tradition? They put that flag up at the state capitol in 1961 as a symbol of resistance to integration. It's not subtle. Black folks have to walk past it every day. How would a Jewish community feel if people hung a swastika somewhere? The flag isn't an embrace of history. That's a talking point. Come on, people. I would have loved to use all of that in the speech. Sensing that, Obama smirked at me. Obviously, we shouldn't say that. As he vented, I considered that the public debates around guns, race, even the Confederate flag had been unfolding in a more thoughtful and mature way than usual since Wednesday's massacre. There had been fewer Ted Cruz's grasping for relevancy or tweets. It was possible that Obama's initial statement about the shooting on Thursday, maybe even his speech about guns to the mayors in San Francisco on Friday, had helped set the national tone from the top, inspiring some empathy and reconciliation. It was also possible that the flag's defenders were quieter than usual, simply because the terror attack was overtly carried out under their banner. The NRA was always quiet after a mass shooting, its social media account conveniently taking a sabbatical after each one. So a little bit of his little ranty stuff I'm leaving in here. But it was more likely that the goodwill, generosity, and grace the families of the victims showed with their act of forgiveness had rubbed off on everybody in a profound way. It felt as if we were all walking in a different direction than usual, as if their actions had been history just a little bit, as if maybe they'd opened a brief window in time when we could all be a little better. A window where maybe, as Obama had said in Selma 3 months earlier, the South could rise again, not by reasserting the past, but by transcending it. It wouldn't hurt to make folks feel good about what those families did, Obama said, to show that they ushered in the opposite of what the killer intended. If I'm going to do this, he continued, That's what I want to talk about, the concept of grace. It was clear now that I'd be writing a eulogy, whether I wanted to or not. But I still had little to go on. What I needed out of this meeting was some sort of writing prompt, some lead to follow. I made a mental note to call Joshua Dubois and ask him to explain the concept of grace as parishioners understood it. So Joshua Dubois is this guy who was working, and his father was preacher and grandfather preacher, but he ended up working for Obama on the campaign. And one day when Obama was especially frustrated, he asked him, "Would you like me to send you a devotion for tomorrow?" And Obama said, "Sure, go ahead." And so he did, and he said, "Do that for another week." And so he did, and eventually he ended up sending him one every morning for the whole time he was in office. And so they called him Obama's pastor, even though technically he probably wasn't. He was working on initiatives to reach out to African American youth, and through churches especially. But let us issue a challenge, Obama continued. I don't want to congratulate ourselves too much when we as Americans just allow this shit to keep happening. Talk about guns, talk about the flag, talk about the way hundreds of years of racial subjugation and segregation still shape the present. But leave room for the possibility of progress. Leave room for grace. Then he pointed at me. Write it up. Pour a drink and let it rip. If you need some inspiration, read some James Baldwin. Then give it to me. And I'll work on it if the muse hits. All right? So that's how Cody got assigned the eulogy. That's really all the time we have on the actual calendar. It's fun to read the detail behind how the speech gets written, especially the pangs of frustration that Cody runs into trying to get it done. Multiple drafts go back and forth between him and Obama over the last 24 hours. No drafts exchange hands before the last 24 hours because he's working to get it to a point where he can give it to him and not be embarrassed. And Obama substantially rewrites it, which I thought was interesting that Cody made the whole thing about a speech that Obama basically took 4 pages, scratched, wrote, made edits to 2, threw 2 away and started over again with the last 2, keeping some of the content, but just handwritten. And they went back and forth like that over the course of the trip where Cody was entering the last set of edits on Air Force One as Obama was en route to the church. Or that it wasn't at a church, it was at the College of Charleston gym, like the basketball gym. But so it's fun to see how all that plays out. And to see how James Baldwin ends up in the speech and what ends up in the whole thing. So I think the book's a good read. I enjoyed it. If you're a progressive thinker on policy, you'll love it. If you're not, it's probably still worth reading because you'll get a lot out of the whole experience of writing for a president. There's a lot of it that's most of it's nonpartisan. It's just these few little sides that he takes off on. And so I just thought it was a great book. And that's really it. Thanks for your coming this morning or tuning in online.
All right, thank you, Lucky. Appreciate it. You'll have a blessed Sunday. We'll see you in worship shortly. And stay tuned next week for our final summer book review. God bless you all and take care.
All right. Thanks.
Yes.